Sophia Chen never forgot where she came from. The soft morning light filtered through the large windows of her penthouse as she packed a simple backpack for her trip. She chose practical clothes, worn jeans, comfortable shirts, and her favorite field jacket that had seen better days. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was married to one of the richest men in the world. Growing up in a small apartment above her parents' restaurant, Sophia had learned the value of hard work early. Her mother and father had come to America with almost nothing, working 16-hour days to give their daughter opportunities they never had. Sophia still remembered the smell of her father's famous dumplings and the sound of her mother counting the day's earnings at their tiny kitchen table late at night. "You're really not taking the private jet?" James asked, leaning against the doorframe of their bedroom. His kind eyes watched her with a mixture of admiration and amusement. Sophia smiled as she zipped up her backpack. "You know how I feel about that. The research team is traveling on a budget. What kind of team leader would I be, showing up in a private plane while they all squeeze into economy?" James crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her. Even after 12 years of marriage, he was still amazed by her. While other billionaires' wives spent fortunes on designer clothes and jewelry, Sophia put her energy into saving rainforests and fighting climate change. Her environmental research had helped create protection laws in 3 countries. "That's why I love you," he said. "But you know, I just bought Transglobal Airlines. You could at least let me upgrade your team to business class." Sophia playfully pushed him away. "No special treatment. Nobody on that flight will know who I am, and that's exactly how I want it." She didn't mention that most of James' executive team didn't even know about the airline purchase yet. He had bought the company quietly just 2 months ago, planning to improve it from the inside before making any public announcements. Later that afternoon, Sophia stood in line at the airport check-in counter, just another passenger in the crowd. The woman behind the desk didn't give her a second glance as she handed over a boarding pass. Sophia had used her professional name, Dr. Chen, on the ticket. She had earned her PhD in environmental science by working 3 jobs and winning scholarships. That achievement meant more to her than her married status ever would. As she waited to board, Sophia thought about the 3 weeks ahead. Her team would be studying pollution levels in remote parts of the Amazon, collecting data that could help stop illegal logging operations. The work would be hard. Long days hiking through dense jungle, sleeping in basic accommodations, battling mosquitoes and heat. She couldn't wait. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Miss you already. Come home safe to me." Sophia smiled and typed back, "Always do. Love you." She never took their life for granted. They had met when Sophia was presenting her research at a tech conference where James was a speaker. She had no idea who he was then, just thought he was a smart guy who asked good questions about her presentation. Their first date was at a small noodle shop that reminded Sophia of her parents' restaurant. Now, as she boarded the plane with her well-worn backpack, Sophia thought about how nothing essential had changed between them. James still looked at her the same way, still valued her brain over her beauty, still supported her need to make a difference in the world. The flight attendant at the gate barely glanced at her boarding pass before waving her through. Sophia found her seat in first class, the one small luxury she had allowed herself after James insisted she needed to arrive rested. She stowed her backpack and settled in, completely unaware of the drama that would unfold on her return journey 3 weeks later. For now, she was simply Sophia Chen, environmental scientist, heading to do the work she loved. The fact that she was also Mrs. James Chen, wife of the man who secretly owned the very airline she was flying on, wasn't important to her at all. 3 weeks in the Amazon rainforest had left Sophia exhausted but fulfilled. Her research team had collected twice the data they'd hoped for, documenting alarming pollution levels that would help their case for stronger environmental protections. As she said goodbye to her colleagues at the small regional airport in Brazil, her body ached from sleeping on thin mattresses and hiking through dense jungle for hours each day. "You sure you don't want to join us for the layover in Miami?" asked Lynn, her assistant researcher. "We could all use a real meal after those freeze-dried dinners." Sophia smiled, brushing away a mosquito that somehow still found her attractive after all these weeks. "Thanks, but I managed to get a direct flight to New York. I'm hoping to surprise James by getting home early." What she didn't mention was that her direct flight was on Transglobal Airlines, the company her husband had recently acquired. James had been texting her updates about the airline's operations, mentioning concerns about customer service and outdated policies he planned to overhaul. She was curious to experience the airline firsthand, though she had no intention of receiving special treatment. The Sao Paulo International Airport bustled with travelers when Sofia arrived. Her field clothes, now even more worn than when she left home, were stained with mud that wouldn't wash out in the river where they'd bathed. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and weeks without makeup had left her face tanned and freckled from the sun. At the check-in counter, the Transglobal agent barely looked up as she processed Sofia's ticket. "Your flight is on time, departing at 10:40 p.m. You've been assigned seat 3A in first class." Sofia nodded her thanks. First class wasn't her style, but after 3 weeks of roughing it, she wouldn't mind a comfortable seat for the overnight flight. James had insisted on booking it when they'd planned her trip, saying, "You'll need sleep before you land, not another reason for back pain." The boarding process was efficient, and Sofia was among the first to walk down the jet bridge. As she entered the aircraft, a flight attendant in the main cabin smiled politely and directed her toward the first-class section. Sofia made her way to the front of the plane where plush seats awaited. She found 3A by the window and stowed her battered backpack under the seat in front of her. The first-class cabin smelled of leather and expensive perfume. Business people in crisp suits tapped on laptops, while a famous actor Sofia recognized from movies sat scrolling through his phone across the aisle. She sank into her seat with a sigh of relief. For the first time in weeks, she checked her appearance in the reflection of the darkened window and almost laughed. No wonder the check-in agent had given her a second glance. With her muddy boots, faded jeans, and field jacket that had seen better days years ago, she looked nothing like the typical first-class passenger. Sofia pulled out her phone and sent a quick text to James. "Boarding now. Can't wait to see you tomorrow morning. You're going to be so surprised." What she didn't know was that James had arranged to be in New York when she landed. After 3 weeks apart, he couldn't wait another day to see her. He'd planned a quiet breakfast at their favorite cafe, just the two of them, before the demands of his busy schedule took over. As Sofia settled in, she noticed other passengers giving her curious glances. A woman in an expensive business suit wrinkled her nose slightly as she passed, while an older gentleman did a double take before finding his own seat. Sofia was used to this kind of reaction. Throughout her life, people had underestimated her based on her appearance, never guessing at her accomplishments or connections. She pulled out a scientific journal from her backpack and began to read, oblivious to the approaching flight attendant who was eyeing her with growing disapproval. The man's name tag read Bradley, and he had already decided there was a problem with the casual woman in seat 3A. The overnight flight from Sao Paulo to New York was one of Transglobal's most prestigious routes, often carrying celebrities and business executives. Bradley Wilson prided himself on providing impeccable service to the right kind of people, and in his mind, the disheveled woman in hiking boots definitely didn't qualify. As he moved purposefully toward her seat, Sofia remained unaware that her peaceful journey home was about to become anything but comfortable. Bradley Wilson had worked first-class cabins for 15 years, and in his mind, he could spot someone who didn't belong from a mile away. As he approached seat 3A, his perfect smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He noticed the mud-stained boots, the worn backpack tucked partly under the seat, and the woman's casual clothes that looked like they belonged on a hiking trail, not in the premium cabin of Transglobal's flagship international flight. "Excuse me, ma'am," Bradley said, his voice smooth but with an edge that made several nearby passengers look up. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" Sofia glanced up from her scientific journal, slightly surprised by the request since she was already settled in her seat. "Of course," she said, reaching into her jacket pocket and pulling out her crumpled boarding pass. Bradley took it between his manicured fingers as if touching something distasteful. He studied it for longer than necessary, his eyebrows rising slightly. "Is there a problem?" Sofia asked. "Well," Bradley said, loud enough for those around them to hear, "it appears there may have been some kind of mistake with your seating assignment." His tone suggested this was clearly the only explanation for her presence in first class. Sofia straightened in her seat. I don't think so. My ticket is for seat 3A, which is this seat. Her voice was calm but firm. A businessman across the aisle watched the exchange with interest, while a couple in designer clothes whispered to each other. Bradley was putting on a show, and everyone knew it. Yes, I can see that, Bradley said with a thin smile. But there must be an error in the system. First class on Transglobal's international routes has certain standards. His eyes moved deliberately over her mud-stained jeans and field jacket. Sophia understood immediately what was happening. It wasn't the first time she'd been judged by her appearance, though it had been a while since anyone had been quite this obvious about it. There's no error, she said calmly. I have a valid ticket for this seat. Bradley's smile tightened. Ma'am, I've worked for Transglobal for 15 years. I know when someone has been incorrectly assigned. He lowered his voice to a stage whisper that was still perfectly audible to nearby passengers. Perhaps you used frequent flyer miles? The system sometimes makes mistakes with those upgrades. Sophia took a deep breath. She could easily end this by mentioning her husband owned the airline, but that wasn't her way. She had earned respect throughout her career based on her own merits, not her connections. My ticket is legitimate, she said simply. I'd like to remain in my assigned seat. Bradley's pleasant facade began to crack. I'm afraid I need to insist. We have several elite status members who could be boarding soon, and all our first-class seats should be available. My seat is not available, Sophia replied. It's assigned to me, as my boarding pass clearly shows. The confrontation was drawing more attention now. An older man in an expensive suit shook his head disapprovingly, though whether it's Sophia or Bradley wasn't clear. Perhaps I should call the head flight attendant, Bradley said, making it sound like a threat. This is a matter of company policy. Sophia shrugged. If you feel that's necessary. Bradley gave her one last look, as if expecting her to back down, then turned on his heel and marched to the front of the cabin. Sophia returned to her journal, trying to ignore the stares from other passengers. A young flight attendant named Maria passed by, giving Sophia a sympathetic smile that vanished when Bradley returned with an older woman whose name tag identified her as Diane, the head flight attendant. Ma'am, Diane began in a practiced customer service voice, I understand there's some confusion about your seating assignment. There's no confusion on my part, Sophia said. I have a ticket for seat 3A. Diane nodded tightly. Yes, but my colleague informs me that there may have been a system error. Sometimes our computer assigns seats incorrectly, especially with last-minute changes. There were no last-minute changes, Sophia explained. This ticket was booked weeks ago. Bradley cut in. Diane, we're already running 20 minutes behind schedule, and we have passengers waiting to board. Diane looked torn, glancing between Bradley's insistent expression and Sophia's calm one. Ma'am, I'm sorry, but to resolve this quickly, would you mind moving to our economy comfort section? We can offer you extra legroom and complimentary beverages. Sophia could see this was escalating beyond reason. May I ask what specifically about me makes you think I don't belong in this seat? Is there something wrong with my ticket? Bradley stiffened. It's not about your ticket, ma'am. It's about maintaining certain standards in our premium cabins. His eyes again moved pointedly over her travel-worn appearance. A murmur ran through the nearby passengers. Someone whispered, just move her already so we can take off. Diane seemed uncomfortable but unwilling to contradict her colleague. I'll need to call the co-pilot to resolve this if we can't come to an agreement. Please do, Sophia said, her voice still calm though her heart was beating faster now. She wasn't angry for herself, she'd happily fly economy, but the principle of the matter bothered her deeply. People shouldn't be judged by their clothes or appearance. 5 minutes later, the co-pilot arrived, a man named Thomas who looked harried and stressed about the departure delay. What seems to be the problem? He asked briskly. Bradley jumped in before Sophia could speak. We have a seating issue that's delaying our departure. This passenger, he emphasized the word as if it were different from customer or guest, has somehow been assigned to first class, but clearly there's been a mistake. Thomas turned to Sophia. Ma'am, your boarding pass, please. Sophia handed it over again, maintaining her composure though she was growing frustrated. The co-pilot barely glanced at it. Everything looks in order technically, but he hesitated, looking at Sophia's clothing. But what? Sophia prompted. Transglobal does have certain unwritten expectations for our premium cabins, Thomas said awkwardly. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in our economy section. We could make the change with minimal disruption. More comfortable, Sophia repeated. Or would your staff be more comfortable if I moved? The question hung in the air as Thomas and Diane exchanged glances. Bradley looked smug. Ma'am, Thomas said with forced patience, we're already behind schedule. I need to ask you to cooperate with our crew and move to economy class. We can discuss compensation after we're airborne. So you're removing me from my assigned seat, not because my ticket isn't valid, but because of how I look? Sophia asked directly. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. One woman suddenly became very interested in her phone. That's not what I said, Thomas replied stiffly. This is about company policy and the captain's authority to assign seating for the comfort of all passengers. Sophia could have fought harder. She could have demanded to speak to the captain or called her husband. But looking around at the impatient faces, she decided this wasn't the hill to die on. There were more important battles in life than airplane seats. Fine, she said quietly. I'll move. Bradley couldn't quite hide his triumphant expression. I'll help you find a suitable seat in economy, he said with false courtesy. As Sophia gathered her backpack, she heard a businessman mutter, finally, some people just don't know their place. Maria, the young flight attendant who had given her the sympathetic smile earlier, looked embarrassed as Sophia passed. She whispered, I'm sorry, when Bradley wasn't looking. Sophia nodded in acknowledgement and followed Bradley down the aisle toward economy class, her head held high despite the stares of other passengers. She was too tired to fight a battle that didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. But as she walked, she made mental notes of everything that had happened, names, comments, policies cited. Not for revenge, but because her husband had asked her to report honestly on her experience with the airline he now owned. Little did Bradley know that his victory in removing the simple woman from first class was about to become the biggest mistake of his professional career. Bradley led Sophia through the business class cabin and into economy with the air of someone escorting a trespasser off private property. Passengers looked up curiously as they passed. Sophia kept her eyes forward, ignoring the stares. Her cheeks burned not from embarrassment, but from a quiet anger she rarely felt. Here we are, Bradley announced when they reached row 32, a middle section far back in the economy cabin. I found you an aisle seat. I think you'll be much more at home here. The pause was deliberate, designed to sting. Sophia glanced at the seat. There was a family with a baby nearby and a large man already occupying the middle seat, spilling slightly into her assigned space. After 3 weeks in the jungle, all she wanted was to sleep comfortably on the long overnight flight. Thank you, she said simply, refusing to show any reaction. As Bradley turned to leave, Sophia added, Could I get your full name, please? And the names of the head flight attendant and co-pilot who were involved in this decision. Bradley paused, suddenly wary. Why would you need that information? For my records, Sophia replied calmly. Bradley Wilson, he said after a moment, his tone defensive. The others were Diane Taylor and First Officer Thomas Reed. But I should inform you that any complaint would be pointless. We were simply following company policy. I see. And where exactly is this policy written? I'd like to read it. Bradley's smile tightened. It's more of an understanding, really, for the comfort of all our premium passengers. I understand completely, Sophia said, meeting his gaze steadily. Something in her tone made Bradley uncomfortable. He nodded carefully and walked away. As the plane took off 30 minutes behind schedule, Sophia opened the Notes app on her phone and began documenting everything that had happened, every word that had been said. Not for revenge, that wasn't her style, but because James had specifically asked her to note any issues she observed with Transglobal's service. This certainly qualified. The large man beside her fell asleep before they'd reached cruising altitude, his arm pressing against hers despite her attempts to make herself smaller. The baby 2 rows ahead began to cry. Sophia put in earbuds without connecting them to anything, just to create a barrier between herself and the noise. She thought about calling James but decided against it. He would be furious, and there was nothing he could do while they were in the air. Better to tell him in person when she landed. 2 hours into the flight, Sofia felt a light tap on her shoulder. She removed an earbud and looked up to see Maria, the young flight attendant who had given her the sympathetic smile earlier. "Can I get you anything to drink?" Maria asked, leaning down to speak quietly. "Just water, please," Sofia replied. Maria handed her a bottle of water, then hesitated. "I want to apologize for what happened earlier," she whispered. "It wasn't right." Sofia was surprised by the young woman's courage. "Thank you. I appreciate that." Maria glanced around nervously. "I've only been with the airline for 6 months, but I've seen Bradley do this before. He has ideas about who belongs where." "And the others let him get away with it?" Sofia asked. Maria nodded. "Diane avoids confrontation, and the pilots just want to stay on schedule. Bradley's been here forever and has connections with upper management." She paused. "At least he did before the company was sold. Nobody knows much about the new owner yet." A passenger called for service further up the aisle, and Maria straightened. "I should go. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." "Thank you, Maria," Sofia said, reading the name from her tag. "That means a lot." As Maria hurried away, Sofia added her name to the notes on her phone, this time with a positive comment. The hours crawled by. Sofia tried to sleep but couldn't get comfortable in the cramped space. She thought about the research her team had completed in the Amazon and the report she needed to write. Focusing on her work helped distract her from the discomfort. Halfway through the flight, she stood to stretch her legs and use the bathroom. As she waited in line, she noticed Bradley in the galley area, laughing with another crew member. He spotted her and immediately stopped laughing, his expression hardening. "Bathrooms for economy passengers only," he said loudly enough for others to hear. "First class and business passengers have their own facilities." Sofia stared at him in disbelief. "I am an economy passenger. You moved me here yourself, remember?" Bradley had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, but he recovered quickly. "Of course. I was just making sure you understood the arrangements on our aircraft." An older woman standing behind Sofia in line made a disapproving noise. "Young man, that was completely unnecessary. This poor lady hasn't done anything wrong." Bradley's face flushed. He muttered something about checking on first class and hurried away. The older woman turned to Sofia. "Some people let a little authority go to their heads. Don't let him bother you, dear." Sofia smiled gratefully. "Thank you." When she returned to her seat, she found that the large man had shifted during her absence and was now taking up even more space. Resigned, Sofia squeezed herself into what remained of her seat and closed her eyes, trying to imagine the comfortable bed waiting for her at home. Around 5 a.m., as the cabin was still dark with most passengers sleeping, Maria appeared again with a cup of coffee. "I thought you might need this," she whispered, handing it to Sofia. "You haven't slept much." "Is it that obvious?" Sofia asked with a small smile. Maria nodded. "I noticed you were awake every time I passed by. I'm really sorry about all this." Sofia accepted the coffee gratefully. "It's not your fault." "There's something else," Maria said, her voice dropping even lower. "I recognized you earlier, but I couldn't place where from. Then I remembered. You were at the charity gala for the Environmental Protection Foundation last year. You're Dr. Chen, the marine biologist who won the Global Science Award, aren't you?" Sofia was surprised. "Close. I'm an environmental scientist, but yes, that was me." Maria's eyes widened. "I was working as a server at that event before I joined the airline. You gave a speech about saving the rainforests. And weren't you there with—" Her voice trailed off as realization dawned. "Oh my God." Sofia put a finger to her lips. "Please keep that to yourself for now." "But Bradley and the others, they have no idea who you—" "And I'd like to keep it that way until we land," Sofia interrupted gently. "This isn't about who I'm married to. It's about treating people with dignity regardless of how they look or what they're wearing." Maria nodded, though she looked pale. "Of course. I won't say anything." As she hurried away, Sofia could see her whispering urgently to another flight attendant who looked back at Sofia with wide eyes. Within minutes, there was a noticeable change in the atmosphere among the crew. Flight attendants who had ignored her earlier now smiled nervously as they passed. Even Diane, the head flight attendant, made a point of coming back to economy to ask if she needed anything. About an hour before landing, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Henderson speaking. We're beginning our descent into New York's JFK Airport. The local time is 7:15 a.m., and the weather is clear with a temperature of 68 degrees. We anticipate an on-time arrival at Terminal 4. There was a pause, then he continued. "Before we land, I'd like to invite a special guest to return to our first-class cabin for the remainder of the flight. Dr. Sophia Chen, if you could please gather your belongings. Our crew will escort you to your original seat." A murmur ran through the cabin as passengers looked around curiously. Sophia felt her face grow warm as all eyes turned to her. This was exactly what she had hoped to avoid, special treatment because of who she was. Word spread through the aircraft like wildfire. Flight attendants whispered urgently to each other in the galleys, throwing nervous glances toward row 32 where Sophia sat quietly. The transformation in the crew's behavior was remarkable. People who had ignored her for hours suddenly appeared offering pillows, blankets, premium snacks, and apologies thinly disguised as casual conversation. "More coffee, Dr. Chen?" asked a flight attendant who hadn't acknowledged her existence until 10 minutes ago. "No, thank you," Sophia replied politely. She wasn't interested in their sudden attention now that they suspected who she might be. In the cockpit, Captain Henderson was having an urgent conversation with the ground staff at JFK. His face grew paler by the second. "You're absolutely certain?" he asked, gripping the radio tightly. "Dr. Sophia Chen is the wife of James Chen? The James Chen who just bought Transglobal?" "Confirmed, Captain," came the reply. "Mr. Chen is currently waiting at the gate with CEO Robert Williams and half the executive team. The situation has been classified as a top priority incident." Captain Henderson closed his eyes briefly. "And she's sitting in economy because my crew removed her from first class." "That's our understanding, sir." The captain took a deep breath. "Thank you for the information. We'll be landing in 30 minutes. He switched off the radio and turned to First Officer Thomas Reed, who had been involved in moving Sophia to economy. "We have a serious situation, Thomas. The woman you helped remove from first class, she's the wife of our new owner." Thomas's face drained of color. "That's impossible. She was dressed like she'd been camping in the woods for a month." "Because she had been," the captain replied grimly. "She's an environmental scientist returning from a research expedition in the Amazon, and her husband is waiting at the gate." "Oh God," Thomas whispered. "Bradley insisted she didn't belong in first class. I was just trying to resolve the situation quickly because we were behind schedule." "Well, we're about to have a much bigger problem than a delayed departure," the captain said. "Go find Diane. We need to handle this carefully." Back in economy, Maria hovered near Sophia's row, her eyes filled with worry. When the large man beside Sophia got up to use the bathroom, Maria quickly slipped into his vacant seat. "Dr. Chen," she whispered, "I feel terrible about what happened. I should have said something earlier when Bradley was being so rude to you." Sophia gave her a reassuring smile. "You were kind to me when others weren't, Maria." "I noticed that, and I appreciate it." "Is it true what they're saying?" Maria asked nervously. "About your husband?" Sophia sighed. This was exactly what she had wanted to avoid, being treated differently because of who she was married to rather than who she was as a person. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "But that's not something I usually talk about. I prefer to be known for my own work." Maria nodded. "I understand. Your research on pollution in coastal waters was amazing. I wrote a paper on it during my environmental studies course last year." Sophia looked at her with surprise. "You studied environmental science?" 2 years at community college," Maria said with a small smile. "I couldn't afford to finish, so I took this job instead. The flight schedule lets me take online classes part-time." For the first time since the humiliating incident began, Sophia felt a genuine connection with someone on the plane. She and Maria chatted about environmental research until the large man returned, forcing Maria back to her duties. Meanwhile, in first class, Bradley was having a meltdown. Diane had just informed him who Sophia really was, and the implications were sinking in. "Why didn't anybody tell me?" he hissed, straightening napkins that were already perfectly aligned. "How was I supposed to know she was somebody important? She looked like she'd been dragged through a muddy jungle." "Because she had been in a jungle," Bradley, Diane replied coldly. She's an environmental scientist who's been doing field research in the Amazon. And more importantly, it shouldn't matter what she looks like. We're supposed to respect all our passengers. Don't give me that, Bradley snapped. You agreed with me. You helped move her. Because you made such a scene that it seemed easier to move her than continue the argument, Diane said. A decision I now deeply regret. The captain's voice came over the crew intercom. Senior cabin crew to the forward galley, please. Diane gave Bradley a hard look. Pull yourself together. We're going to fix this as best we can. At exactly 2 o'clock, James Chen walked into the main conference room at Transglobal Airlines headquarters. The room fell silent immediately. Every seat around the large table was filled. The CEO, Robert Williams, the airline's senior executives, the flight crew from the Sao Paulo flight, and even Bradley Wilson, who looked like he hadn't slept since the plane landed. James didn't sit down. Instead, he stood at the head of the table, his expression calm but serious. Before we begin, he said, I want to make something clear. This meeting isn't about punishment. It's about learning and making changes. A visible wave of relief passed through several people at the table, especially Bradley, whose shoulders sagged slightly. That said, James continued, his voice hardening, what happened yesterday was completely unacceptable. Not because the passenger was my wife, but because no passenger should ever be treated that way. The door opened and everyone turned to see Sophia enter. She had changed from her field clothes into a simple blouse and pants, but still wore no makeup or fancy accessories. She smiled briefly at Maria, the young flight attendant who had shown her kindness, before taking a seat next to James. Dr. Chen has graciously agreed to join us, James said. She has something she'd like to say. Sophia looked around the table, meeting everyone's eyes before speaking. I'm not here to demand apologies or see anyone lose their job. I'm here because I believe this incident highlights a bigger problem, not just at Transglobal, but in how we treat each other as human beings. Bradley couldn't meet her gaze, staring down at his hands instead. We make snap judgments based on appearances, Sophia continued. We decide who deserves respect and who doesn't based on clothes or accent or how much money they seem to have. I've experienced this my whole life, as a woman in science, as the daughter of immigrants, and yes, as someone who prioritizes comfort over fashion when I travel. Several people nodded, including Maria and, surprisingly, Diane, the head flight attendant. Yesterday wasn't just about a seat on an airplane, Sophia said. It was about the assumption that someone who looks a certain way doesn't belong in certain spaces, and that needs to change. James placed a hand on her shoulder. Which brings us to why we're here. Transglobal is going to make some changes, starting today. Robert Williams, the CEO, leaned forward. We've already drafted a new customer service policy, Mr. Chen. It explicitly states that appearance is never a factor in seating assignments or service quality. That's a start, James acknowledged. But policies are just words on paper unless they're backed by training and a genuine change in culture. He turned to Bradley, who visibly tensed. Mr. Wilson, you've been with this airline for 15 years, correct? Bradley swallowed hard. Yes, sir. And in that time, how many passengers have you decided didn't belong in first class based on how they looked? Bradley's face flushed. I don't know, sir. Too many, James said firmly. But instead of firing you, I have a different proposal. Everyone at the table held their breath. Bradley looked like he might pass out. You, along with First Officer Reed and Ms. Taylor, will help develop and lead a new training program on unconscious bias and dignified service for every employee of this airline. Bradley looked up in shock. Sir? You made a mistake, James said. A serious one. But mistakes can be valuable if we learn from them. Your experience yesterday can serve as a powerful teaching moment for others. Sophia added gently, sometimes the people who've made the mistake are in the best position to help others avoid making it. For the first time, Bradley looked directly at Sophia. Why would you give me that chance? After how I treated you? Because this isn't about you or me, Sophia replied. It's about making sure no one else feels the way I felt on that plane. James nodded to Maria, who had been quietly watching from her seat. And Ms. Rivera will be joining the executive team as our new Director of Customer Experience. Her degree in environmental science may be incomplete, but her understanding of how to treat people with dignity is exactly what this airline needs. Maria's eyes widened in shock. Mr. Chen, I don't know what to say. Your actions yesterday said everything we need to know about your character, James told her. You showed kindness not because you knew who my wife was, but because you believed every passenger deserves respect. As the meeting continued, Sophia watched the faces around the table. Some, like Bradley, still looked uncomfortable, but others seemed genuinely moved. Real change wouldn't happen overnight, but this was a start. Outside the conference room windows, a transglobal plane took off into the clear blue sky, carrying hundreds of passengers who had no idea that their airline was being transformed from the inside out, all because one simple woman in muddy boots had been kicked out of first class by people who had no idea who she really was. 6 months later, Sophia stood at the back of a training room at Transglobal Airlines headquarters, watching Bradley Wilson address a group of new flight attendants. His presentation style had changed dramatically since she first met him on that fateful flight. Gone was the snobbish attitude and fake smile. In their place was something much more valuable: authenticity. I made a terrible mistake, Bradley told the attentive group. I judged a passenger based on her appearance and treated her with disrespect. It cost me my dignity, nearly cost me my job, and it violated everything good customer service should stand for. A few of the trainees glanced back at Sophia, who had become a familiar face around the airline's training center. She smiled encouragingly at Bradley. This couldn't be easy for him, reliving his mistake every few weeks with each new group of employees. The woman I mistreated, Bradley continued, gesturing towards Sophia, could have demanded I be fired. Instead, she gave me the chance to learn and grow. More importantly, she helped me see how my actions affected others. After the session ended, Sophia joined Bradley and First Officer Thomas as they reviewed feedback forms from the trainees. The personal story is making an impact, Thomas said, shuffling through the papers. They're rating these sessions much higher than the standard corporate training videos. Bradley nodded. It's still hard to talk about, but it gets a little easier each time. He looked at Sophia. Thank you for coming today. Having you here makes the story real for them. I'm glad it's helping, Sophia replied. In truth, she was impressed by how seriously Bradley had taken his role in the new training program. What had started as an alternative to firing him had become a genuine mission to change the airline's culture. Later that afternoon, Sophia met James for lunch in the company cafeteria. Unlike most CEOs who stayed isolated in executive dining rooms, James made a point of eating with employees at all levels. Today, he was deep in conversation with a baggage handler about ways to improve the luggage tracking system. How was the training session? James asked when she joined him. Really good, Sophia said. Bradley's come a long way. James smiled. The whole airline has. Customer satisfaction scores are up 20% since we implemented the new training program. Maria appeared with a tray of food, joining them at the table. Her promotion to Director of Customer Experience had raised eyebrows among some executives, but she had quickly proven herself. Her first initiative, a complete overhaul of how the airline handled passenger complaints, had been so successful that other airlines were now trying to copy it. I've been looking at the passenger survey data, Maria said, spreading some papers on the table. People are noticing the difference in how our staff treats them. One comment specifically mentioned how a flight attendant helped an elderly man who was confused about his seating instead of just directing him to move. Sophia smiled. Small moments like that make all the difference. We've got something bigger planned, James said. The board approved my proposal for a scholarship program for employees who want to finish their education. He looked meaningfully at Maria. Inspired by someone who's been taking night classes to complete her environmental science degree. Maria blushed. That's amazing. It will help so many people. As they talked, Diane Taylor, the former head flight attendant who had been part of the incident with Sophia, stopped by their table. Dr. Chen, I wanted to let you know that the accessibility training we discussed is scheduled for next month, she said. We'll be showing staff how to better assist passengers with invisible disabilities. That's wonderful, Sophia replied. After Diane left, James squeezed Sophia's hand. You've transformed this company more than I ever could have. We did it together, Sophia corrected him. And it's not just about Transglobal. 3 other airlines have reached out about implementing similar training programs. That evening, as they drove home, Sophia's phone buzzed with a text from her research team. They had secured funding for another expedition to the Amazon, this time to study the impact of recent conservation efforts. "Looks like I'll be traveling again next month," she told James. "Transglobal or private jet?" he asked with a smile. Sophia laughed. "Transglobal economy class. Some things never change." "You know, as the owner's wife, you could always—" "I know," she interrupted, "but that's not who I am." James nodded, understanding completely. It was her simplicity, her genuine nature, that had first drawn him to her. While other people wore their status like armor, Sophia had always been comfortable just being herself. The next morning, Sophia spotted something on their kitchen counter, a small plaque that James must have left for her to find. It read, "True Class. Treating people with dignity regardless of appearance, status, or circumstance. Inspired by Dr. Sophia Chen." She smiled, tracing the words with her finger. What had begun as an uncomfortable incident on an airplane had grown into something much more meaningful. A reminder that real change often starts with one person standing up for what's right, even when they're standing alone.